Hello, everyone. Welcome to our event. I'm Riley Searcy. I'm a freshman at the DC campus of New York University, and I will be introducing the panelists for the event, Losing Control, Managing Stress in the COVID-19 Crisis. Our first panelist is Dr. Emily Balchetis, an associate professor of psychology at NYU and the author of Clearer, Closer, Better, How Successful People See the World. Emily is interested in the conscious and non-conscious ways people fundamentally orient the world. In particular, she focuses on how the motivations, emotions, needs, and goals people hold impact the basic way people perceive, interpret, and ultimately react to information around them. Our next speaker is Dr. Lawrence Balter, Professor Emeritus of Applied Psychology at NYU. Dr. Lawrence Balter is an internationally renowned psychologist and author of numerous books for children's, parents, and professionals. He hosted the Dr. Lawrence Balter programs on ABC Talk Radio nationally and on WABC Talk Radio in New York. And our moderator and final panelist is Dr. Zoe Raguzius. Dr. Raguzius is the Executive Director of the Counseling and Wellness Services at New York University. She oversees the mental health services as well as the sexual misconduct support services for the over 40,000 students. She was hired in the summer of 2004 to start the Wellness Exchange, a set of programs and services that respond to the varied wellness needs of students. With that, I will pass it on to our moderator, Dr. Raguzius.
Thanks, Riley. I'm thrilled to be here with Dr. Balter and Dr. Balchetis. I just wanted to remind the audience, first of all, we welcome you and we thank you for being with us today. And we'd like to remind you of the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will be taking questions from the audience later in the program. And so please feel free to be using that box as you hear material and as you are interested in asking questions. Dr. Balchetis, I'd like to start with you just to present you with a scenario that has been all too common, at least here in the counseling service, hearing from students that they've left campus, they feel distracted, they don't feel like they have a designated place to study at home, they feel like they can't learn remotely, they're not focused, and they're really worried about multiple things from their health and safety to the financial state of their families to what their careers might look like. You know, I just really want to hear from you, and how do you think we can help young people manage this kind of stress and keep in mind what they can control?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I am grateful to be a part of this conversation today. All of these topics that you've put on the table are big ones. They're some of the scariest things that maybe some of us have ever had to face in our lifetime so far. I feel like we could spend hours talking about any of them, and I'll just focus on maybe a few suggestions that I think might provide some guidance or might be tools that people could use to tackle any of these issues that they're facing. Now, first, a little caveat, which is that, of course, there's no single strategy that's going to help every single person in every one of the challenges that they face. And so that's not my goal today, to offer a prescription that will be a cure-all for everybody. Instead, as a motivation scientist, and in my lab, what we do is study tactics that would be effective for helping people overcome the challenges that they face when trying to meet some of the most important goals that they set for themselves. And so what we try to do is build out sort of a repertoire or a menu of possibilities and options that people might try on. So right now, what is happening to us is scary, and it's different. And we might find ourselves with what the news is sharing with us and with what our personal circumstances are providing, just feeling overwhelmed by that fear and in the uncertainty. And of course, it is that. But if we allow it to just stay at that level of just being scared and just focusing on what is uncertain and uncontrollable in our life, I think we'll probably exacerbate the very real challenges that we all are facing right now. So here are some suggestions that I might have. And it comes down to a fundamental principle of human motivation. We all want to be in control. We all want to have certainty, and to some degree, we dislike ambiguity and that lack of control or uncertainty. That's why children, one of the first words that they say is no. At least it was for my son, it was no. And why? Why is it no? Because that's one of the very first ways that children can exert control. that I think is an example of how even at a very early age, we're seeking control. And so when we lose some of what we had been relying on, those aspects of our life that we felt like we had managed and that we were in control of, it can be challenging for us now. So what can we do? Well, one fundamental tactic might be to think about those things in our life where we do have control. And now some of us might be reacting to that statement of me just saying like, well, find what you can control, and saying there's so much that I can't. I don't get to decide where and when and how I do my job. I don't get to decide where and when and how I educate my children or manage my own personal responsibilities and mental and physical well-being. And if we leave it at that and say that, well, that is true, that we do have a lot less control, there's no path forward, right? And what we're looking for is a path forward. So there are moments, even for those of us that are in the most extreme and challenging of circumstances, we can find moments where we can conscientiously and mindfully reinsert opportunities for control. And that might just be the first 5 minutes when we wake up. Now, my knee-jerk reaction is to look at my phone, see what time it is, and then see what came in overnight. And I know that that's not healthy for me. I know that far more bad news comes into my inbox than good news comes in. I'm always looking for that one piece of good news, but rarely do I find it. And so I realized for myself that my knee-jerk reaction, wake up in the morning, look at my phone, check my email, even before I'm out of bed, isn't healthy for me. And that might be sort of an automated habit, bad habit that I personally have formed. But that's a moment, those first 5 minutes before the day really gets started, that I can conscientiously and mindfully choose to control my own experience. And for me, at least, by setting a new standard, creating a new habit for myself, not only have I controlled that aspect of my life, but I probably set myself up for a happier, at least morning until things get in full force. So I challenge all of us to think about where we can exert more control in our life. And even for those of us that might feel like, well, we really can't, so much of what is happening right now is out of my control. That's a mindset that we can change, because there will be moments, and they may be only a few minutes, they might be half a day, maybe you find yourself with a whole day, but we can take advantage of those brief or longer moments to try to conscientiously choose something that would be more productive or provide more happiness for ourselves. That would be one suggestion. And the last thing that I'll say before I turn it over is that yes, this is a scary time, but it is also an opportunity for creativity and reinvention. So because the whole world is in a new space right now, everybody is trying to figure it out. And that gives us latitude and freedom to try something new. So we right now have the opportunity to try a different tactic for setting our goals. We have the opportunity to try new strategies to structure our day and to manage our ever-increasing to-do list. Now we have the chance to do that. And this might be an opportunity for us to try something that maybe didn't work before, but might work now, or to try something we've never tried before and see how it fits in this very new space that we found ourselves in.
Thank you. And Dr. Balter, Dr. Balchetis mentioned her son, and you are our resident parenting expert. And so we are really interested to hear, first of all, you know, just thinking about the scenario that I posed around college students and certainly younger teenagers, I wonder your thoughts on parenting that population at this time. You know, any tips or tricks for us, and could you focus a little bit on screen time in this comment as well?
Well, to begin with the screen time, before we were probably being very strict about it. And right now, I don't think it's a good time to be strict about screen time. In a lot of ways, the kids can tell us, see, it really is a good idea. And I don't think we should come down hard on that issue. Kids need to socialize. They need to break. Look, let's start with different ages, first of all. A little one saying no, that is a way of asserting their independence. And that is a way of saying, I'm a self and I'm different from you. But that theme really runs through life in a way. And as they get into teen years, of course, you see the same kind of thing. Very difficult. Let's now move forward just for a second, then I'll jump back and forth with the age groups. Since we're talking about college age, suddenly you're thrown together. You know, a college age person is a young adult, an emerging adult, as psychologists sometimes refer to them, and they're supposed to be breaking away from their families, establishing themselves as independent individuals, and now they're thrust back into the family. It's a very difficult situation for parents to now have a grown-up in the, you know, in the house with them, which they didn't really expect to have, and for the young adult to be in the house. Now, how do you treat each other? How do you deal with each other? You can't really expect your adult child now to live by your rules because you said so. This has to be a negotiation. It has to be an understanding. And your kid doesn't want to be there with you any more than you want him. You know, you probably figured you could use that room, you know, for your office. Now the kid's back moved in. It's not an easy thing. So you have to begin by negotiating together, working together on how you're going to live together. It's a new set of rules. And just before we were talking about an opportunity at this point to be creative. And I think here's an opportunity to recreate kind of relationships. You know, you start out on another grounding. Your adult child now is an adult, has opinions, has a life outside of you. You can't now dictate about when they go to bed, whether they're on the screen, what they're doing. At the same time, however, there are such restrictions. It's a very strange time. There may be opportunities to do new things and to be freer about certain things, but at the same time, we're really not free. So I'd like to, let's go back a little bit to the younger ones. With a young child, it's easier to get away with telling them what to do. Now, they may ask weird questions like, how come, you know, real small children, why are people wearing masks? And how come we can't go out? And why can't I be at preschool? And why are my friends not around? And there are simple, basic answers you can give to a small child and get away with. You know, schools are closed, people are getting sick, so we're keeping you home so that you'll be healthy. I mean, you can get away with that. Let's build a mask or create a mask that looks interesting and fun, and so on and so forth. With kids who are in school age, this is really topsy-turvy. You know, they're supposed to be in school, they're supposed to be with their friends, supposed to be learning. This is going to have an impact on them for the rest of their lives. They're not really learning in the way that we're accustomed to teaching them, and they're not having an opportunity to socialize with one another face to face. And work out their differences. They're doing things remotely. Now, it's true, they've had a lot of opportunity to learn how to develop relationships remotely, which we didn't as children, because, you know, those technologies weren't around for us. So they are more comfortable with it. But still, you have to be together with other people. We're social creatures, and they're not together. This is going to have an impact. I don't think any of us can predict what that impact's going to be, but it certainly is going to have when their schooling has been interrupted. And that's going to have an impact also. They're supposed to be learning basic things. Are they able to do that through remote learning? Well, there's some questions, you know. We have to learn how to do remote teaching better because we didn't have to do it before. You know, it's a new thing for everybody. Now, you get to your teens and your young adults. You know, teens, interesting thing about teens, they might be rebellious in general because that's what teenagers are supposed to do. It's supposed to break away from you. On the other hand, I heard someone say the other day that now it's a little different because they can't be mad at you and blame you for what's going on as much as they'd like to blame you for restricting them. This is something that's beyond your control as well. And that's a whole new thing. That's a difficult concept if you think about it for a minute. You know, when you're a little kid, you know, you might say, well, you said we're going to have a picnic. And you say, well, it's raining and we can't have a picnic, you know? Say, well, but you said we were going to have a picnic. So, you know, it's like your fault. This is like, it's not your fault. You don't even know what to do about it. And so important things, you were talking about creating opportunities for yourself. Two takeaways before I keep quiet for a little while. One is you need to create a purpose for yourself. I mean, that's something that, we know that through history. I mean, the important thing is, really important part of existence is creating a purpose for yourself. And one way to create a purpose for yourself so you feel less helpless and less hopeless is to take some action. And there are actions you can actually take. For example, you can help other people. If you live in an apartment building, and you're someone who goes out and shops, then in a very practical, down-to-earth way, you can ask the people on your floor by slipping a note under their door or sending them an email, I'm going out shopping. I'll be going to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or wherever, Publix if you're living in Florida. Then you say, is there something I can get for you? Now that's doing something for someone else, giving you a little purpose too. And it's an important thing to do. The other is somebody suggested, and I thought it was really an interesting idea. They're in a position where they can order books and buy books. I mean, they have the finances to do that. So they buy a bunch of books each week and they put them downstairs, and people can have a library. Or you can just lend. A neighbor of mine just sent us an email and said, here's my bookcase. Are there any books that any of the neighbors on this floor would like to borrow, you know, during this time? So those are the actual things you can do that are useful to other people. And if you're doing something for somebody else, generally speaking, it makes you feel better about yourself. And the more action you take, the less hopeless and helpless you're going to feel.
Could I jump in on that? I love what, thank you. I love what Dr. Balter was saying. And as a motivation scientist, let me just add another facet that you might add on to that, that suggestion. I love the idea about creating a community library if you can, or finding ways to volunteer your time to help somebody else. One thing that we tested in our lab was how can we make sure we fit that in to our life? Some of us might find that we're busier than we were before. Others might find that they're less busy. There's more unstructured time. And this strategy works for both ends of that spectrum. Now, what we tested was we asked people to figure out something that was important to them, like Dr. Balter is suggesting. Find a purpose, find this thing that drives you, that you're passionate about, that might bring you a sense of drive for the day. We asked them to do the same thing and write it down. Writing it down is important because, and then leaving it next to your bed or leaving it taped up the refrigerator or keeping it as sort of the desktop on your phone or your computer because you see it. And so that keeps it in mind. That was step one. Step two was where we chose two possibilities. We asked some people when they wake up in the morning to think about, now what could you do today to help you meet that goal, to take a step towards finding that purpose for yourself, and make a list of those things that you could do today, and then schedule it into your calendar. Now, what that does is make it concrete. We prioritize the things that are in our calendar over the things that we just leave in our mind. So we can take these things that are important to our mental health and our personal well-being just as seriously as we used to take doctor's appointments or showing up to class or meeting up with friends. When they're in our calendar, we do them. So put those things into your calendar. That would be a step towards that passion or that purpose in life. And so that was one strategy. Do this at the beginning of the day for the day. Now we compared that to people who we asked, do this for the week. Wake up on Monday or today on Friday, wake up on Saturday, and think about what could you do every day this week that would help you take a step towards accomplishing this goal of yours. Now, of course, that's more challenging to do, to think about a week rather than a day. We also asked them to try to schedule those activities or those steps into their weekly calendar. Of course, that's challenging. And they told us it was that. But what we found was that people who scheduled for the week rather than for the day found 2.5 more hours in their schedule over the course of a week to make progress on this goal of theirs. Now, why is that? Well, because in 5 days' time, they already had it in their calendar that they were going to go grocery shopping for somebody, or that they were going to make a phone call that was really important for establishing a social connection. And they didn't forget about it, or their day didn't get too busy as the day went along. So they found more time in their day and they carved it out of their day. They gave themselves a schedule that they were able to live their life by that helped them to accomplish their goal in more concrete ways.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I think that we all do what our calendars tell us to do, and so that really is a really good strategy. Dr. Balter, you talked about this having lasting effects for us and for our children not being in school. I wonder if Dr. Balchetti's suggestion is one way to mitigate that, and your other thoughts about how to mitigate the negative lasting effects that this may have on us and our children.
Yes, no, I think what Dr. Balchetti suggested is very nice, and it's something doable. And once, you need some doable things, and platitudes like everything's going to be all right, and that sort of stuff doesn't work. We don't know that everything's going to be all right. It's a topsy-turvy world. We can't predict what's going to happen. And I think part of it is to be honest with your kids to a point about your experiences and how you're feeling about things, and not knowing. Just the fact that is, we don't know, and it's something that we're going to have to navigate together and figure out together over time. And it's not something that's got a simple solution to it. You're not with your friends. One of the things you can do is let me suggest several things. You need to commiserate and be empathic. You can't be critical at a time like this. It's just not helpful. Not that it ever is really helpful to be critical, but it's better at this point to go along with what your kids are saying. So they're complaining, why can't I go to school? I'm so tired of being in the house with you. And, and for parents, look what they're going through. They're trying to figure out what their future is going to look like. Are they going to be able to pay their bills? If you have a partner at home with you, you're both trying to work from home. At the same time, you're trying to supervise your kids with remote learning. At the same time, you're worried about what's going to happen with your parents. They're older. Are they going to be okay? And there's so many things that are on your mind. And I think some of those can be shared, of course, in an appropriate way, depending upon the age of your kid, with your kids, and tell them, yeah, it is terrible. You don't get to go to the play soccer. You don't get to get out with your friends and do what you do, and that's a lousy thing. I mean, I think you need to commiserate with them when they're complaining, rather than give them some kind of what I call like a bromide, an empty suggestion about everything will be taken care of. The one side of it, though, is we're hopeful that it's temporary. The temporary, of course, is a very flexible, stretchable thing. Temporary is what? Is it short-term temporary, long-term temporary? And we still don't know. Another thing is, you said early in the morning, Dr. Balter said, early in the morning, you get on your phone and you see what horrible things. I got to tell you, for myself, I stopped watching the news. I want to suggest this very well. Stop watching the news. I have friends who are like, listening to the news all the time or watching the news all the time. Don't do it. Pick out a time when you're going to maybe listen to catch up on something. If there's a breakthrough, you'll hear about it. But to listen to and be pinned, to the TV or the radio all day is just going to be upsetting. And it's pointless to do that to yourself. And with the kids too, don't have the news on all the time. They don't need to be exposed to statistics about how many people are sick and how many people are dying and what's happening here and what's happening there. Remove yourself from some of that. It just isn't healthy, okay? So several things. Be empathic. Don't expose yourself constantly to all this bad news. And tell your kids where you are in all this. We're trying to figure out what's going to be with my job, for example. Some people won't have a job. And that's a terrible thing. How are they going to pay their bills? With an older child, that's something you might talk about a little bit. Together as a family too, there are other activities you should do. As Dr. Balter said, come up with group activity. I mean, you have to pitch in a little bit. It's not like you have a chore and you have to do it. And, after all, we used to say years ago, well, you're part of the family and you got to do this and you got to do that. Well, now it's a little different. You are part of a family. You got to do this, you got to do that. But there's another aspect to it now. And I think that's the emotional support and doing something together. So it isn't just, you got to do a chore. It's, do me a favor. I know your younger brother or sister is driving you crazy, but do me a favor, read her a book. Read him a book, do a game with him, keep him quiet a little bit. And when the little kids are doing some silly stuff, understand that they're little kids. This isn't a time when they can't be humorous, do something stupid, act like a little kid, just because we're preoccupied, upset, maybe depressed, which is a little subject. Let me do a little sidebar. Watch out. There's red flags for you. Watch out for yourself as a parent, because we're talking about parents, on over-reliance on alcohol, substances, on anti-anxiety medications, on antidepressant medications. Those are red flags. Look out for sleep disturbances in yourself and in your kids. Eating, changes in your eating habits. Some people will binge, some people stop eating. And these are red flags for you to look at and know, you're not really handling this well. And you're not really handling this in a way that's healthful if you can. But these are very, very dire circumstances, and these are things that can be discussed. But let me get back to do stuff together. Find activities that you all can do together. Now, older kids are not going to do the same things younger kids are going to do, which means you got to spend some time with an older kid. You got to spend some time with a younger kid. You're being stretched really thin now. If you have a good social network or a partner, here's a time when you really have to do some work together. how to help each other, support each other, not be critical of each other, not point out the other one's failings, but let's do this together because we've got to pull together for a while. You know, there's the little phrase we hear on the media all the time, we're all in this together. Well, we're not all in this together, really. Really, the states aren't together themselves. The city, you know, is divided into sections. We're not all in this together. What's in this together is our family unit. We're all in this together. And I think it's a better way to look at it in a very localized way and do stuff together. It's good for you socially, it's good for you emotionally, and you can get stuff done. So, you know, kids know how to prepare food also. You know, kids know how to do a laundry. It isn't just a chore. It's like, give me a hand. I'm trying to be on the phone with a client. You're trying to do schoolwork. We've got other things to run the household. It's not easy, and it'll be just a little bit more manageable if we all kind of do it kind of like teamwork. That's my pitch for now.
Dr. Balter, a follow-up. You talked about, you know, sort of being honest to, you know, depending on how old your children are. Is there anything we should keep from our children?
Well, I think with small children, there's no reason to talk about deaths and dying. If that subject comes up, then you handle it. With small children, you can answer those questions with them. With a very little kid who might ask about, if they heard someone, unfortunately, if there's a loss in your family and the subject comes up, even with preschoolers and small children, the subject of death can be discussed with them, but at their level. You know, what happens when someone dies? When someone dies, they don't feel anything anymore. They don't feel anything anymore. If you have religious beliefs, you talk about those. But those are things that have to be dealt with. As kids get older, yes, you can talk to them, ask them questions. It's always better to have somebody lead you rather than you're imposing more than they want to know. You know, they ask you a question, where did I come from? And you start giving a whole talk about sex education when they act, there's an old joke, you know. I say, well, we really come from Cincinnati, you know. But the idea is don't give them more information than they need to have or want to have. Let them ask you questions. Ask them, what do you suppose? What do you think? You know, how does this come across to you? What are some of your friends saying? You know, what are they feeling? What are they doing? How are they dealing with their parents? What concerns do you have? And then address it at that level. With teenagers, the other thing is, with teenagers, there are defense mechanisms. Well, in all ages, we have psychological defense mechanisms. And of course, as a practicing psychologist and psychoanalyst, I would naturally look at that for a moment. And that is, some people deny. And so they're not going to feel as much stress as another person. Some people are more anxious from the time they were little infants than other. So they're going to be more sensitive to changes around them. Some people do something called counterphobic behavior, which means instead of going away from something that's a problem or worrisome or menacing, they run into it because they don't want to acknowledge they're feeling scared or worried. So these are things to keep in mind, that people have different ways of protecting themselves. When we say defense mechanisms, we really mean protective devices to help them deal with their own anxiety. Don't expect everybody to do the same. Like Dr. Balter said before, there's no one way for each person. There are different ways for different people to cope, and you can't impose a way of coping. But keep in mind that teenagers, we know, tend to think that they're invulnerable, but they're worried about you. They really do. What's going to happen to you? Are you going to be all right? And that's, you know, that's in the back of their heads. They might get angry and snippy, and they might do what we call displacement. In other words, you're worried about one thing, but you take it out on someone else. These are things that have to be understood and not be, you shouldn't become defensive about them, but understand them. I know this is terrible. You can't do the stuff you want to do. You have we're home. We're breathing down your neck. You're breathing down our neck. This is a tough situation. We understand that. Let's figure something out. Also, separate time for separate age groups. You know, if you can find even a few minutes to spend a little separate time with each kid, although I know that's really hard, give them a little bit of time to themselves. Also, when I say to themselves, one little addition, with older kids, they need their privacy. They really do. They want to be on the phone. They want to be FaceTiming their friends or whatever. They have to have that opportunity. So leave them alone. Don't be looking over their shoulder every minute. And if they're up late at night, remember that teens and older kids go through a totally different kind of a sleep cycle. And people aren't aware of that, but it's true. There's a shift physiologically at late teens into early adolescence into late teens, where they stay up late at night, and it's hard for them to get up in the morning. But that's a physiological change. It isn't just that they're being, annoying, want to get on your nerves. So they need privacy, and they also need a little separate time with you, and they need a lot of understanding.
Thank you. Dr. Balchetis, I'm interested in this idea of the family as a team, as a way of sort of keeping control and sort of giving people things to do, and feeling something sort of bigger than yourself. I wonder your thoughts on that.
Sure, and to relate to what Dr. Balter was saying, sort of about these sort of, almost the personality traits that we bring to the table, or things that are even bigger than the individual, but something that all humans have in common is that bad looms larger in our mind than good. So if we think about it, back in caveman days, or evolutionarily speaking, it was very important for us to be aware of all of the threats that were around us, things that could cause us harm. And in a sense, that's what we're experiencing now, is this threat we can't even see, the virus that's maybe floating around, or it's on the surfaces that we're touching. There is a very real threat that is taking over our mind. When you couple this very real threat with our propensity to let those negative thoughts take up much more mental bandwidth than our positive thoughts, that's kind of a dangerous place to be. That can lead to depression. It can contribute to anxiety. And that's something that maybe we can focus on as a family unit. So what we can do is take some proactive steps to try to undo what might be sort of fundamental to our mental structure as humans, to prioritize the negative over the positive, especially in this time when the world is doing that to us. We can take steps to try to change that ratio of the bad stuff to good stuff that's in our mind. Now, here's two suggestions. One was suggested by my child's preschool class, and we've tried to do this too, which is create a gratitude journal. You might find yourself already doing this, or it's something you might try. Give it a different name if you don't like the name journal. Gratitude list. And think of those things in our day that went well, that we're grateful for. And we practice this over our shared meals as a family. We ask our son, who's 3.5 years old, what was the best part of your day today? What made you the most happy today? That's language that a 3.5-year-old understands. He doesn't know the word gratitude. He does know the word thank you. And so we ask him, what did you say thank you for today? And that is a concrete way that you can insert a bit more positivity into your day, and that you can do with young children and adults. We practice the same thing we ask our child to practice over the dinner table, is reflecting on what was good in our day, what the best part of our day was. Now, another for adults, or people who are managing busy schedules and to-do lists and jobs and our own personal responsibilities, we might find that the negative thoughts or the anxiety comes because we're not sure if we're getting enough done. And this also relates to the idea of what's the lasting damage that we might be experiencing, that we are hoping to mitigate right now. What can we do now so that there aren't these lasting negative effects? And notice that's what we're talking about, is what are the lasting negative effects? And hardly ever into the conversation do we enter the thought that there might be lasting positive effects. We have more time as a family. Yes, that's challenging, but it's also a blessing, right? That so infrequently might the world or us choose to spend this kind of time together, right? So we can think about what are the lasting negative consequences. We could also try practicing, and it might take that, practicing, thinking about what might be the lasting positive effects of this experience that we want to continue moving forward, carving out time for family meals together, at a rate that perhaps we weren't doing before, but we find ourselves doing now. Okay, so for managing maybe a busy to-do list, what can we do? Well, one thing that we can do is, again, as I suggested, is set these concrete goals, create a to-do list for us. That I have already said, I recognize. But what I didn't say is that we should take time to reflect on those to-do lists, and especially what we've crossed out. Right? Because probably what is happening is that our what needs to get done list is exceeding the what we have gotten done list. And that creates anxiety. And so we might always feel like we are behind and we're not moving at the pace that we are used to. Probably most people feel that way. But what we can do is take time to reflect on what we actually did accomplish for those things that are important in our life that we have listed. We need to get these done today or this week or this month. and take time to reflect on that. That might help decrease some of the anxiety, because what probably is most salient is what these lingering anxiety producing feelings of what I need to get done, that I just can't find the time, I can't get the resources, my mind won't let me do it, I feel depressed or anxious and I just can't get myself to do it. That's what we're thinking about. And we're not giving ourselves credit for what we have gotten done. What I do with my son is that we've started creating hopefully we'll come up with a better name, but a COVID journal. And we're just putting in pictures of our day, and I'm having him write down the one word. He's practicing writing letters. What's the one word that describes this fun thing that we did today? Now, what that does for me as a parent is that over the last month now, I can see how his letters have improved, right? So in my mind, I'm worried, oh my gosh, he's not at school. He doesn't have a teacher teaching him how to spell his name. Is he going to go into preschool or kindergarten and not know how to write his name? And that's what's going to be the thing that everybody else is learning their name, but my kid won't. But actually, by reflecting on this journal of our activities that we've done, where he writes a couple letters of his name, I'm actually realizing over the last 2 months, it hasn't been the regressive effects that I was scared might be happening. But in fact, there is progress. I'm doing that with my 3-year-old, but I'm doing it for myself as well. I keep a journal for the week, and I write down what needs to get done during the week. And I am not ripping away or throwing away the pages that I've crossed out, but I am taking time to go back on the previous weeks and recognize, yeah, my life is really stressful right now and I'm feeling overwhelmed. But look at all this stuff I crossed out. I actually am getting things done, even though what comes to my mind most readily is what isn't done yet.
I have to say, I'm so thrilled. Your optimism is contagious. It's really wonderful. It sounds as though you, unlike me, see the glass is half full. So that's really, I think, wonderful. But let me build on what you said. Even though that's not how I would normally look at it. This is an opportunity for new things, and there are positive aspects if one looks for them and tries to create them, as you're suggesting, which I think is excellent. For example, there are opportunities for kids, since they have time and they like to be on social media and so on, for example, I mean, not to be too simple-minded about it, but they can take a course. They can do something that they always wanted to do. Guitar lessons online, everything's online. You can take a tap dance class online. You know, you can do all sorts of things. You can take an excursion through the Metropolitan Museum, for example. You can take music lessons. You can go to places you've never visited. One of the things that we like to do, since I don't like to watch the news, is you can look at webcams at ornithology streaming labs, and you can see ospreys sitting on their eggs, eagles feeding their babies. You can see red-tailed hawks doing things. Now, maybe that isn't everybody's cup of tea, but that's just an example. There are tons of things you can start to look into, which you might not otherwise have thought about or even considered. But now you have an opportunity to do that. So I'm just trying to be a little more positive, having heard Dr. Balter's suggestions. So that's a way of creating an opportunity to see things in a slightly more optimistic light.
Thank you. Thank you both for your contributions so far. I wanted to see, Riley, if we have any questions from our audience.
Yes, we do. To start, this might be good for you, Dr. Guzius. How do you motivate yourself to keep up with schoolwork and assignments when you're struggling with depression or anxiety made worse by the COVID epidemic?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that from the college perspective, and then I'll certainly turn to my colleagues. You know, what I would say is that you have to know when you have to ask for help. When you say depression and anxiety, that is across the spectrum, and sometimes you do need professional assistance in order to keep yourself safe. And so we encourage people who find it difficult to do their daily tasks to be thinking about whether they need some help in order to get themselves back on track. That doesn't mean they'll have to be in, you know, quote, therapy forever, but it does mean that you want somebody who does this for a living to be assisting you in getting yourself back on track, whether that be with sort of behavioral strategies or, if necessary, with medication. So that is one thing that I expect that people will be thinking about. And then I wonder if my colleagues have any contribution for those who might feel depressed and anxious trying to do their work, whether they're adults or younger children.
Well, there's some things they can do on their own to some extent, but when you're depressed, you don't want to do anything. That's the thing. You can suggest, do this, do that. When you're really depressed, if it's a real depression, then you want to stay in bed, you're going to be in your pajamas, you're not going to want to deal with people. So people around you, particularly now that you're home, people around you have to make an effort to do things that are supportive, in addition to suggesting therapy, which is very important, and to point out that, like you said, it's not necessarily forever, although it's probably not a bad idea for people to be in and out of therapy forever. and also, but what you can do as a family, if a person's depressed, sit down next to them. Just sit down next to them and hear them. Say, what is it? What's on your mind? What's happening? What are you feeling? Bring them some snack. Sit down, put on a TV program together, a movie. Do something with closeness to a person who's in your family, who's feeling depressed and anxious. So if you're asking for yourself as a college student who's depressed or anxious, somebody else has to do something for you. Now, sometimes kids say, I don't want to be, or adults too for them, I don't want to be dependent on someone else. It's okay to be dependent on somebody else for a time while you get yourself together.
That's right.
I think that's an important message.
And just two things that I would add that pick up on the similar theme is considering acceptance and forgiveness. So it might be challenging for us to accept that we're experiencing these issues of depression or anxiety. And maybe this is something that we've never had before. Maybe it's something we have had before and have worked hard to get out of, and we're feeling it creep back again. It may be challenging for many reasons to accept that this is the place that we find ourselves in now. But of course, acceptance is a necessary step towards improvement. If we just bury our head in the sand and try to deny that maybe we're experiencing these feelings for the first time or again, it's going to be more challenging for us to do as Dr. Balter is suggesting, to reach out and ask for help. So that would be my first suggestion is to consider acceptance. The second one is compassion, and that might be self-compassion, and it might be other compassion, that we need to perhaps change our expectations for ourselves if we find ourselves in this position. We might need to let go of what our past self has been able to do or what that past self looked like, even if it's just for the moment, right? Is to say, this is the space that I'm in right now, and I'm going to allow myself to be in this space and give myself forgiveness if I find myself being blaming myself for this situation or being angry at myself for being in this situation. We can be a bit more compassionate with ourselves. And the same from the outside perspective is that it might look like somebody's being lazy when they're laying in bed. And it might look like they're not trying to pitch in with the family or shared responsibilities that we have. And that's another place to practice compassion and trying to see another perspective. Especially if the person who does look more lethargic is having a hard time accepting or articulating that that's the space that they're in. We can try to play devil's advocate with our knee-jerk reactions or attributions for why somebody is doing what they're doing, and try to come at those explanations from a place of compassion instead.
Yes, that's excellent. It's not one of those snap out of it, get with the program, let's pull your own weight. It's not that at all. I think what you said is absolutely excellent. Yes, compassion is empathy and compassion and concern, and to be there with the person. You don't have an answer necessarily, but you can be there. And that's really important, just to be a presence. And if the person's feeling really miserable and upset and unhappy, it's understandable. It's understandable, and it's exacerbated by these circumstances.
Right, and let's also just put on the table that there might be stigma. We might feel it ourselves, having a hard time accepting that we're in this space. There might be stigma within our community for mental health issues. And that is a very real thing that some people might struggle with, that contributes to the problems with accepting or asking for help or being compassionate and receiving compassion. There is stigma. So let's acknowledge that. We all of us on the panel acknowledge that there's stigma. Also, the thing to recognize, if we're thinking about feeling that there's stigma that's holding us back from this, is that depression and anxiety are real. They are not made up. They are not just in our mind. They change, these mental health conditions change our neurological experience. They have a real physiological effect on our brain. And just because you can't see it, like you can see a cut, if you cut your finger with a knife, you can see that. And people offer help. You can't see what is happening in people's brains as they're experiencing depression and anxiety, but it is very much the same thing.
Yes, and I think, jumping off on that thought, when you're feeling stress, then it does have a physiological impact. It's not a mysterious thing. It's not like it's all in your head. But when you have some pains, when you have stomach aches, headaches, when you're feeling awful, those are the result of stress hormones. So if we can explain to people that stress can lead to changes in your hormones, your physiology, and that translates into bodily symptoms, then it's a little more understandable, and it's not just a figment that you should just get over. And sustained stress does lead to breakdowns in your body's functions. And I think that's an important thing. And you're right, the stigma thing is really so hard to overcome. While you were saying that, I was trying to figure out an analogy to be helpful. The only thing I could think of was, even military people have acknowledged now that there's such thing as post-traumatic stress disorder, and they get help for it. Mm-hmm. And those are, tough folks, women and men out there who are on the front lines doing stuff that actually results in feeling stress and traumatized. And that's, I don't know, that's a great analogy, but to point out that you don't have to be so tough, and you can be tough and still experience having anxiety and depression and feeling traumatized and feeling worried.
Here's a concrete suggestion. This has always resonated well with me. It's from my father. He was a child and family therapist for his career, and this is actually his suggestion. And the basis for it is the idea of a headache. What would you do if you had a headache or a migraine? A lot of people take medication. Now, what if you had a bacterial infection? What would you do? Well, you would take a pill to help cleanse your body of that bacterial infection. Now, we can do the same thing. We can prescribe ourselves a course of action for our mental health struggles in the same way. He actually created a prescription pad. He wrote one himself, like a piece of artwork, not a real one, right? A piece of artwork that was a quarter-size sheet of paper. It looked like the same sorts of prescription pads that doctors would have used, and it left a space for a self-prescription. Maybe there are things that that can help with the struggles that you're experiencing. Maybe somebody else knows what might be helpful in that case. You can write yourself a prescription, write it down on that pad, prescribe yourself a course of action, a daily 15-minute walk, a 5-minute lap around your apartment, perhaps, and write that down as a prescription that you give to yourself. Write it down as a prescription that you might offer for somebody else. And yeah, that's a metaphor and it's an analogy, but it puts our mental health issues on the same playing field as our physical symptoms that we would prescribe ourselves a course of action and adhere to in those circumstances. We can try to do the same thing for those struggles that we might have that pertain to our well-being.
Riley, what else is our audience asking?
Thank you guys for your thoughts. Another question I'd like to hear your thoughts on are, can you talk about coping with disappointments and sadness associated with missed milestones, birthdays, anniversaries, because your support system is dealing with other needs?
Well, those are real losses, and I think they have to be acknowledged as such and not brushed aside. And you can't really make up for them. You can say, maybe in the future sometime we'll have, I know somebody who lost a parent to this, and they couldn't even visit him because they weren't allowed to, and that was awful. And they're going to have a celebration of his life sometime in the future when it's possible. But that's not the same thing. It's a real loss. It's something that'll never be made up, and you can't pretend you can make up for it. Now you have to live with the loss, digest that loss, and actually grieve the loss. And I don't just mean the loss of a person, but the loss of things that you were looking forward to. Kids can't go to the prom. Kids can't go on to look at what college they're going to attend. There are lots of stuff, that haven't been able to get together with certain people they wanted to get together with. And then, of course, the real losses. But one needs to acknowledge it's a real loss. It's not something you can brush aside or sweep under the rug, and you have to have a sense of mourning. I think it's important to live with that kind of grief for a while, and then eventually it'll lessen itself over time. But it's not something that you can just pretend and doesn't matter, or you'll just get over it.
There might also be some comfort in knowing that you're not alone. By having missed out on these milestones, missed out on important traditions, you're not the only person that's experiencing that. And that can provide some comfort to people, that knowing when we are out of this, there will be others that have shared that experience with you and that you can process the experience with.
And from the university's perspective, that is the goal for creating these remote graduation experiences and otherwise bringing people together on screen, not, to Dr. Balter's point, not to replace the milestone that cannot be replaced, but just to Dr. Balcheris's point, is to just say, like, here are all the people who are experiencing this together, with the hope that that brings people some comfort and feeling of support.
Several people I know of now having dinners, Zoom dinners, if you will, because they had a tradition of all getting together, or brunch meetings, because they always had a tradition on Sundays of getting together, and of course they can't. So now it's become this strange, bizarre, new kind of, let's have a Zoom brunch, let's have a Zoom dinner, or we can watch a movie and discuss it that way and have a group of us involved together remotely. Very, 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 very strange world.
Thank you. Another question is, how can we deal with the anger and feelings of hopelessness due to the misinformation and conspiracies that are being spread on social media, and the stress and tension that's come from people taking this, like, people not taking this seriously, people taking this seriously, and the toxic environment that's resulted from that?
I was hoping Dr. Balcheris had an answer for that one. That's a tough one.
That's a tough one for sure.
That's
I think what Dr. Balter said earlier on about choosing how we consume media is key here for our own mental health. Part of it is that there's misinformation that's spread out there. We can choose to not engage with that. That's one thing that we do have control over. Part of the anger too is that perhaps people within our family unit, however extended that might be, might have different opinions than us, might be consuming other media than us, and that can be very frustrating. We have had experience with this in the past, and we can draw from those experiences. How have we dealt with it before? When the conversation comes to politics at Thanksgiving, what do we do then? What has worked? What hasn't worked? We can call upon our past experiences to negotiate this new domain, this new space we find in, but that does share similarities with conflict that we have all faced before and have navigated through. So rely on our past experiences, they're relevant here. The other thing is that there are real consequences to oneself. So when I'm saying we can control what media we are exposed to, and we can control ourselves in that way, the retort, to play devil's advocate, is that yes, but when somebody else doesn't wear a mask, I am at risk. And so somebody else's choices has a very real impact on me. That is 100% true. That is why it is important that we do all that we can to at least do our part. By us wearing a mask, even if others don't, we are protecting ourselves to some degree, and we are protecting others to some degree. And so even when it feels like we are being threatened by others' behaviors in that sense, or others' beliefs, there are things that we can do to lessen that impact. And there are other things besides wearing masks, for example, that we can do, which is controlling our exposure in a social media sense, in a physical sense, that can reduce our contact in a physical and a real sense, and in a psychological sense for those people that are affecting our well-being, physical and mentally.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And I think with our own families, with kids, when they object to putting on a mask, for example, or want to go out and do stuff, you have to point out to them, you know, it may not be just yourself that you're concerned about, but be concerned about me and be concerned about other adults. And you might be bringing something home, and that's really not fair. And I think that's something that you can do you know, a local thing, something closer to home. As far as the bigger question, what do you do with relatives who think differently and have different political views? Like you mentioned Thanksgiving, I think that's a good, a good example. There isn't much you can do. You can't really convince another person to change their attitudes and their political points of view. You know, we know that pointing out logically doesn't really work because it's an emotional thing. At least largely an emotional thing. And politicians know how to whip up your emotions. And also very hard to figure out. It's true that we're sort of sophisticated. Maybe we think we can figure out like, what's a conspiracy theory? But you know, from more and more reading about what's been going on, you don't know where information's coming from. And so some of it may not even seem to be a conspiracy theory, but it has been a conspiracy theory, and it comes from someplace foreign. You don't even know where it came from. When I say foreign, I don't mean just overseas somewhere, but it's come from some place that you have no knowledge of. And so as much as you want to be on guard against it, and of course, like what I said was my solution is that I don't want to watch the news. You know, I'll read certain things and I'll watch it for a couple of minutes, and then I'll stop taking it into account for what that's worth.
And one last question before we wrap up this event. For older adults who are struggling with finding that sense of purpose that you guys discussed, what are some strategies for coping with that and feeling purposeful?
I think finding a way to fulfill others' needs is a possibility for consideration. So you can take time to reflect on what is it that I want to do for myself that's going to bring me peace, or it's going to bring me personally purpose. And for some people that might be challenging to actually do those things now, where they find the most joy and purpose in their life when they're thinking more in a more insular manner. So I encourage people to think more broadly. Think about the neighbor down the hall or the family that's 3 houses down from you now, and think about their needs and where might they be struggling. And of course, maybe you don't even have the opportunity to have a conversation to ask, but you might conjecture what might be helpful for them. If they have young children, it might be thinking of activities. One thing you could do is try to pull together things that you have in your own house or your own apartment that might be little odds and ends to create a craft project. You put it in a brown paper bag and you leave it outside their door, or you leave it in your mailbox with a sign that says grab bag of kids activities. And that might be a way for you to do something yourself without contact with others that provides a resource for families or individuals who are in need, that can find them if they would like to find them. And that might be something that we haven't thought about before, is trying to fulfill a need for somebody we've never met, for a problem that we don't even know that they have. But that's one way to start thinking out of the box, outside of our routine, to find ways to be purposeful and driven to help others.
Yeah, no question about that. And I second that. I applaud that. That's naturally you want to take care of yourself so you can be useful, and you don't want to put yourself at risk, because if you get sick, then you can't help anybody. But if you can do something, this is really hard for most people, because most people are egocentric, basically. But if you can find something that's larger than yourself, you will feel better. If you can do something for a cause that's larger than yourself, you will feel better. You will feel better and you'll be better.
And we talk about one kind word here. So, you know, above and beyond actually doing something for older adults who perhaps can't physically move and do the things that we're talking about here. Everybody can control how kind they are to another person, and really how much that can impact somebody in ways that you won't even expect or know. So we say one kind word in a day can really make you feel better, and you have no idea how much it can impact another person.
Yes, and you can call people on the phone if they don't have, if they're older people who might not have a computer or like to do that sort of thing. On our floor in our building, we're all fairly contemporary, but we call each other every so often and just say, what's going on? How you doing? We've established a little email thread, you know, what's going on this week? You know, how's everybody doing? And did you hear about so-and-so? Did you hear about such and such? Oh, the person who moved away, she's now living in California, but she's doing okay. And that's it. And if you do that with an older person who is social, social isolation really takes a terrible toll. How many grandparents are in tears that they can't see their kids and their grandchildren? It's a terribly difficult thing. We need to really be able to touch somebody and hold somebody's hand, or put your arm around somebody, hug somebody. I mean, those are real losses. And so with an older person, you're not gonna be able to do that just because you can't, but you can do, I guess, the next best thing, which is a phone call or an email, or leave a note on the door, or put something under the door and just say, hi, thinking about you, or send a note in the mail. Some thought. The idea is to convey, we're thinking of you, you haven't vanished from our lives.
Great, thank you all so much. That brings us to the end of our event. On behalf of the DC Dialogues Board, I'd like to thank all of our speakers for coming and sharing their thoughts, and all of our attendees.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And a recording will be available at the DC Dialogues website for anyone interested in watching this or sharing this with others. Once again, thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.